Hey, welcome back to Aesthetic Control. I'm Reed, and today we're talking about building a world in the edit. So let's say you've been taking photos for 1 year, 5, 10, 20 years. You've been just amassing work or you've been doing discrete projects. You just have an archive of work and you don't know what to do with it or where to start with it. Here's one option that I like to do. It's building a world. And what does that mean? Let's break it down. On a recent walkie-talkie with Polly B, Daniel Arnold offhandedly mentioned his editing style. He shoots for a month, all those scans go into a folder for the month, that month folder goes into a year folder. He goes back each month and looks at it, goes back each year, looks at it, edits it, and he said something about in the edit he tries to build the world. And I think that's pretty fascinating and a great starting point to think about putting together a photo project, a photo book, a zine, something like that. So, to talk about world building in a body of work or in an edit, I pulled 3 examples: Alec Soth's Sleeping by the Mississippi, Trent Parks' Minutes to Midnight, and Nancy Rexroth's Iowa, because I think these are 3 great examples of how an artist or photographer can, within the confines of a book, create a world that you travel through. And I've also pulled my zine, Poacher, to bring you through and show you how I built this imagined world that I came up with in this risograph zine that I made a couple years ago. We'll start with Alec Soth's Sleeping by the Mississippi. This book was made while Soth traveled along the Mississippi River making portraits, interiors, landscapes, all filled with symbolism. He created a melancholy look at a somewhat lonely vision of life along the river. It's full of odd landscapes with mattresses and beds kind of dotted around, wistful portraits of interesting characters, and lots of symbolism, both in the landscapes and in the people and on the people. It's very, very cool. Next up is Trent Parks' Minutes to Midnight. Minutes to Midnight is a book full of images from a 2-year-long road trip Park took around Australia. But rather than make the story about the road trip, he builds a world showcasing the changing identity of his home country with themes of death, rebirth, and disaster. And all of this is kicked off with a newspaper clipping about the sighting of a UFO, immediately followed by an image of a glowing orb covered in moths. And then we have Nancy Rexroth's Iowa. Named for the memories of childhood visits to the state of Iowa, Rexroth combines the power of the edit with the visual signature of the Diana camera to create a dream world full of memories. There are strange houses and interiors at odd angles, blurry characters dancing through the frame, simple farm life, and visions of children playing and having fun in the woods, all sort of hazily remembered with the unique angle of the Diana camera's plastic lens. So now we've looked at 3 great examples of world building in an edit with publications. Let's take a look at my zine Poacher and walk you through the world that I created for that. Okay, so let's talk about my process I used when creating my zine Poacher. I know I had lots of black and white images made from traveling all over the place over the years. Lots of landscapes, some people, some groups, some religious iconography, and a grip of photos I made while traveling around New Mexico, which itself has its own sort of weighty history related to the development of nuclear weapons. Okay, so there's something there to work with. Another strange element I wanted to work into it, and something I find fascinating, and somewhat stemming from the development of the atomic bomb and the Cold War, is the existence of number stations. Now, number stations are these radio transmissions intended for spies and covert actors in places they shouldn't be. Behind enemy lines, undercover, whatever. The idea of coded transmissions that only a small audience can understand and only a few people can decrypt is just really interesting to me. So I wanted to work that in there somehow. So these all act as a starting point to start building a world. A sort of post-disaster black and white world full of empty landscapes, searing light, and solitary figures. And I'd work in some coded messages and imagery taken from old radio equipment. The coded messages I made were done with something called a one-time pad, which is a way to encrypt and decrypt a message only once and only if you have the code, which I didn't include with the zines, so the viewer has no way to decipher what these messages say. And I wanted to relate that to the idea that these number stations would still be out there transmitting messages to maybe an audience of no one, but to people who have just no way of understanding what's being transmitted. So as we go through this world, we meet small groups of people, singular figures, empty cities, empty suburbs, and finally, we see the titular character, the Poacher, at the very end as they make their way through the landscape we've just seen. For the printed side of things, I wanted to make this scene with my risograph printer, which a risograph printer is a very sort of 80s or 90s technology printer that comes with its own set of challenges, but I used it to scan the collage pages I'd made using my own photos, the coded messages I created, and old radio imagery that I'd found and sourced in old books and on the internet. This is just one sort of example that you can do when you're sitting on a pile of images that you don't know what to do with, or you want to go back and reflect on and start pulling things out and piecing them together. There's a lot more to talk about when it comes to sequencing photo work, different ways that people do it, different methodologies, different ways to make these like larger strings of work that make sense. But I think that thinking about getting the initial edit started, thinking about world building is a great way to sort of set up a context for you to start looking at your photography in a way that it isn't just a string of pictures. It builds a story, and that story tells something about this world that you can create. Cool. So thanks again for joining me on Aesthetic Control. And I think to sum up, the way that taking a photograph removes a scene from the context of reality and puts it into a new context of the photo, you can then take the photo or multiple photos and create an entirely different and new context within the world of the book or zine or project that you're working on. So if you're sitting on a bunch of work that you don't know what to do with, maybe go back and look at some photo books of people that you enjoy, see the kind of worlds that they build, and bring a new set of eyes to this body of work you're sitting on and see if there's something you can pull out of it that maybe you hadn't thought of before, or that can be a reference to existing work or ideas or themes that you've come across in your life, and just see what you can make of it. And that's part of the fun of being a photographer. You just end up with piles and piles and years of work that maybe you didn't understand or know what you were making at the time, but as you've grown, time has progressed, and you've thought about different things, there's a new opportunity to create bodies of work or entire worlds out of what you're sitting on. So thanks again for joining me. We will see you in the next one. Goodbye.